Before anything else, leave a like and check if you are subscribed, because this puts this video in front of more fans and guarantees you hear when the news really breaks. Now, if you are Warriors, you know the pain. Every week it seems like the ground changes, one rumor leads to another, and we don't know if the team is building a future or just putting out fires. But today it's not thinking. Insiders confirmed a huge turnaround behind the scenes, and this changes the course of what could happen from now on. And I'll explain it to you in a simple, direct, and no-nonsense way. What was confirmed, why this happened now, and what this solves in the casting puzzle, so you understand exactly what's coming and don't fall into cheap speculation. Subscribe now and leave a like, because I promise one thing. If this turn of events is really confirmed in the next steps, you will want to have seen this video first. Activate the bell so you don't miss any updates, because from here on the news accelerates, and those who arrive late will only get the summary. And do the following. Comment, "I trust," if you believe in this change, or "I doubt," if you think it is more smoke than fire, because I will read the comments while we connect the pieces. Now come with me, because in a few seconds I'm going to show you the detail that many people are ignoring, and it's exactly this detail that explains why the big movement is so close to happening. Sometimes I feel like being a Warriors fan is living inside a story that never stops changing tone. There was a time when we turned on the TV with an almost automatic certainty. The team knew who they were, they knew how they played, they knew how they responded when the game got tough. And I'm not just talking about victories. I'm talking about identity, that feeling that even when things weren't perfect, there was a direction, a plan, a logic behind everything. But looking at what is happening now, you can see that this stability has become something else. Tension, doubt, a kind of what next, who takes care of each match. And that's why I want to talk to you calmly, like someone sitting in the room and putting their cards on the table. Because there are times when the news is not just a number on the table, it becomes a message. And when you look at 13 wins and 14 losses, that's not just a statistical record. This is a warning. It's the kind of brand that makes any fan stop for a second and think, wait, is this Golden State? The franchise that redefined modern basketball? The team that won 4 titles in 8 years? So it is. And this contrast hurts precisely because we know the size of what has already been built here. What bothers me most is not losing a specific game. Every team loses. What matters is the way in which some games are escaping. It's the impression that in many moments the Warriors are trying to recognize themselves while the match is already happening. And that's very dangerous when you have a player like Stephen Curry still playing at an elite level, because the window of genius is not infinite. You cannot treat the peak of an athlete of this caliber as if it were a renewable resource. He is rare, he's short, he is precious, and every season in which the team is looking for its own form is a season in which you run the risk of looking back and thinking you let an opportunity pass you by. Here comes a point that needs to be spoken about with respect, but also with honesty. Steve Kerr. I know that his name, for everything it represents, deserves care, and he really deserves it. We're talking about one of the great coaches in the history of the NBA. Someone who has already won as a player and as a coach. Someone who sees the game in layers that many people don't even imagine. But at the same time, basketball is cruel in this aspect. Reputation doesn't shoot. Reputation doesn't defend. Reputation doesn't solve fit. And this season there is a nagging feeling of inconsistency. Rotations that change too much. Functions that appear to fluctuate. Players who don't know exactly what is expected of them on different nights. And when that happens, the side effect almost always appears where it matters most, in relationships with players, especially younger ones. Because veterans, even though they also suffer from instability, have generally already learned to survive in chaos. Not young. Young people need repetition. They need clarity. They need a minimally predictable timeline to grow. And that's where the story that has been gaining weight comes in. The disconnect between the coaching staff and one of the most talented young people on the squad, Jonathan Kuminga. I've been following Kuminga since the draft. You also saw what I saw. Physical explosion, strength, ability to attack the basket, flashes that make us imagine a bright future. But at the same time, flash is not a completed project. And the word that best defines his season so far is irregularity. Not necessary lie of performance, but of context. Minutes that go up and down. Changing role. Sequences in which he seems to gear up and suddenly the tide turns. And when you combine this with body language, with small signs, with what is perceived between the lines, it is difficult not to conclude that there is frustration accumulated there. And let me be very clear with you, this does not need to be turned into a witch hunt. It's not about saying that Kerr doesn't know or that Kuminga doesn't want to. This type of simplification makes noise, but explains nothing. What I see is a classic fit and timing problem. Sometimes the player has a profile that demands a certain type of freedom, a certain type of sequence, and the system he is in demands something else. Sometimes the coach is trying to win now, protect the team from mistakes that cost games, and the young player just needs space to make mistakes and learn. And when these two movements collide, the relationship deteriorates. Not because someone is a villain, but because the dynamic stops working. Now put this within the Western scenario. The Western Conference this season doesn't allow you to breathe. Every game has the look of a decision. Every team has people capable of punishing you for 3 bad minutes. And the Warriors, instead of dictating the pace and imposing standards, are trying to survive night after night so as not to move away from the pack. This is below the level this franchise has built. This doesn't match what we know that Curry, Draymond, and this entire culture have been capable of doing. So the question that remains, and which I want to ask you bluntly, is this. What do the Warriors need to prioritize now? Because the word priority changes everything. If the priority is development, you tolerate fluctuations. Accept a longer path. Invest in minutes. Live with defeats that teach. If the priority is to win, while Curry is still in his prime, you make tough decisions. You shorten paths. You choose the gift with a coldness that often hurts emotionally, but that makes sporting sense. And that is exactly why the subject of exchange comes back with force. I know that talking about an exchange involving a promising young person affects us because it gives the feeling that you are giving up on a future that could be beautiful. But champion franchises don't live on coulds. He lives by needs. And if the internal diagnosis is that Kuminga's timeline doesn't match Curry's urgency, then logic starts to push the Warriors towards alternatives. In this scenario, one point that stands out is that teams around the league are not blind. They look at the Warriors and see two things at the same time. They see a team with a star who still delivers elite and therefore is in a hurry. And they see a young man with a lot of potential who could be available, especially if the relationship with the coaching staff is really frayed. And when you have a young, athletic, high-ceiling asset, the phone rings. It always rings. And here comes the rumor or trade structure that has been discussed. Kuminga going to the Los Angeles Lakers in exchange for Rui Hachimura, Dalton Knecht, and a future first-round pick. I want you to take a breath and analyze it with me, because this is the kind of proposal that seems offensive at first glance to those who like Kuminga's potential, but may sound more rational when you put the context on the table. Start with Hachimura. It is not an abstract promise. He is a player who has already shown that he can produce, that he understands a role, that he can score without needing the system to revolve around him, and that, alongside Curry and Draymond, has enormous value. Because the Warriors don't need someone who, one day, will turn around. It needs people who arrive knowing what to do, accept their own space, space the court, hit the ball when necessary, and defend multiple positions with discipline. When the team is unstable, a player who simplifies is golden, and Hachimura has this profile of contributing without demanding the spotlight. This is where Knecht comes in, which is a more delicate point. He's a newcomer, he fluctuated, he didn't find consistency in Los Angeles. But I always come back to one idea. Context transforms players. A pitcher especially depends on environment, confidence, clear definition of role, and the type of pitch he receives. And the Warriors, historically, have always been a place where shooters get cleaner looks because of what Curry attracts. If Knecht has a real shot, and if the coaching staff can carve out an objective role for him, there's a chance he could become a useful rotation piece. It's not a guarantee, it's a gamble, but it's a bet with a logic. You're buying a specific profile to fill a specific need. And the first-round pick is what gives the conversation long-term structure. Because when you trade a young player with potential, you need to regain flexibility. A first-round pick gives you two paths. Either you use it to replace youth later on, or you pack in another move. Teams that want to compete cannot run out of ammunition, and choices, no matter how cold they seem, are strong currency in the NBA. Now, why would this type of exchange make sense in terms of timing? Because there is an execution window after January 15th. And that matters because the season clock doesn't wait. The Warriors don't have the luxury of seeing what happens for months and then deciding. Each week weighs heavily. Every bad sequence puts you in a situation where, in the end, you have to chase something that could have been resolved earlier. On the Lakers' side, the idea also makes sense. They would be looking for a young, strong, athletic player capable of growth, someone who could fit in with their core without requiring them to take everything apart. And if they believe that Kuminga, with another coaching staff and another structure, can flourish, they see value. And they would pay that amount with parts that, although useful, may be replaceable within their project. Especially if Hachimura is on an expiring contract and Connect has not yet established himself as an essential part of the plan. Now comes the hardest part, and I want to say this looking you in the eye, even if it's through a screen. Accepting this type of decision requires maturity as a fan, because we get attached to stories. We cling to the idea that he's going to explode here, but the NBA is not romance. It's fit, moment, schedule, and above all, it is a priority. If the priority is to maximize the rest of Curry's prime, you need pieces that fit together now. You need players that Kerr trusts, who know how to live within a system with defined roles, who don't depend on a long period of learning to deliver. And look how this affects the imagined rotation. Curry alongside Buddy Hield on the perimeter, with Jimmy Butler already added on the wing, Draymond as the team's defensive anchor and emotional organizer. With Hachimura, you get another layer of scoring and spacing without taking the ball away from Curry. You get someone who can do the dirty work the right way, cutting, taking up space, punishing when the defense helps too much, holding physically in certain positions. And that's exactly the kind of detail that decides playoff series. From the bench, the conversation remains interesting. Brandon Podziemski as a player that Kerr trusts. Moses Moody being able to finally gain a more stable sequence. Necht as a specific shooting project, and, in the paint, Al Horford offering veteran presence, reading, and consistency. Do you notice how the structure becomes more ready, more functional? Perhaps less exciting on paper for those who love raw potential, but more in line with what a team needs to compete at a high level immediately. And then you might ask me, but isn't that giving up the future? Yes, in part, but it's not a total abandonment. The first-round pick gives back a piece of the future. And more than that, there is a future that cannot be bought. Curry's legacy. What will the Warriors be when this era ends? This question doesn't just depend on having young people. It depends on how you end the cycle. It depends on how you honor the window that still exists. Because sometimes, the way you finish a level determines the type of culture that remains for the next. And here I return to the point that I consider central, the relationship between the coaching staff and the player. When that bond breaks, when the athlete feels they don't have clarity, and the coach feels they can't trust, you enter a terrain where no one wins. The team loses energy, the player loses growth, the crowd is divided, and in the end, you are left watching a talent empty itself within an environment that should enhance it. At this time, a change of scenery is not punishment. It's a solution. It could be best for the player and the team. It could be the way to unlock two stories at the same time. I'm not telling you to like the idea. I'm not telling you not to feel. The fans feel it, and that's part of what makes this sport so great. What I'm proposing to you is an analysis. If the objective is to return to the top, if the West is brutal, if the record shows urgency, if Curry still delivers elite, and if Kuminga's fit seems stuck within this system, then an exchange for pieces that solve immediate needs and still return a future asset could be a coherent move. Now, the question that really matters is, would you? Would you accept giving up Kuminga's potential to try to regain consistency, function, and competitiveness now? Do you believe that Hachimura, Connect, and a first-round pick, together, deliver more to the Warriors' current scenario than Kuminga delivers today within the current context? because this today is what the franchise is being forced to face, and you can't escape. And there is another detail: institutional courage. Great franchises are defined by difficult decisions, not because of comfortable decisions. A comfortable decision is to keep everything as it is and hope that, by some miracle, the pieces will fit together on their own. A difficult decision is to admit that it's not working, look at what hurts, and make changes where necessary. The Warriors were once that type of organization. It was once that franchise that wasn't afraid to think big, to act with conviction, to protect a winning identity. The question is it still? I'll tell you what I feel deep down in all of this. I feel like the Warriors are at a point where every pick carries a message. If it stays still, the message is that the team has accepted temporary mediocrity and will bet that time will resolve it. If it acts, the message is that the franchise still refuses to waste what's left of one of the greatest players in history. And I don't think there is an easy answer, but there is responsibility. And that responsibility, for me, begins and ends with the same sentence. You don't waste Stephen Curry's prime. So now I want to listen to you, for real, as if we were talking without rushing. Do you look at this moment and see a team that needs to insist on development, whatever the cost? Or do you see a team that needs to adjust course immediately, even if it means a bitter goodbye to a young man who many people still believe can become a star? If this trade were put on the table tomorrow, Kuminga for Rui Hachimura, Dalton Knecht, and a first-round pick, would you sign it? Would you refuse? And why? And that's why we're facing one of those moments that define an entire season. It's not just about an exchange. It's not just about one name going and another coming. It's about identity, about urgency, about what the Golden State Warriors want to be while Steph Curry is still at an elite level. Because when history really gets tough, no one will remember the excuse, the almost, the promise. They will remember the decision. They will remember those who had the courage to act at the right time. So I want you to do two things now. First, tell me here in the comments, without further ado, would you make this change or not? And if you wouldn't, what move would you make to save this season and protect the heyday of Curry? I will read the answers, because the opinion of the fans who follow every day are worth more than a lot of noise from outside. And second, if you want to stay up to date without missing any updates, click now on the Golden State Warriors News Today playlist, which will be in the pinned comment. There, I left everything organized in order with the news, the behind the scenes, the analyses, and the pieces connecting video after video in the right way, without you needing to hunt for loose information, because the truth is that from now on, this could change quickly, and those who follow the playlist understand the complete picture before anyone else. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell, because when the next confirmation arrives, I will bring it straight to the point with context and clarity. And if you know a Warriors fan who is lost with so much information and rumors, send them this video now. The dynasty is not over, but it is not sustained by nostalgia. She sustains herself with decision, and the next decision could be the one that changes everything.